All right, hello and welcome to today's webinar. We are excited to have you. I am Melody Mitchell. I am the Professional Education Director here at PACE. We call our unit PACE, Professional and Continuing Education. We are all on here today to talk about Business Analysts, the value add with instructor Neil Sahota. PACE engages in community through continuing education. We also provide opportunities in enrollment, open enrollment opportunities for personal enrichment and professional development. We offer quality, convenience, affordability, and flexibility across all of our programming. And we feel we have a unique disciplinary course content that serves the gateway of higher education. We allow adults to continue their education and guide their own learning. Our opportunities for professional and continuing education help advance careers, foster professional development, and benefits communities of all shapes and sizes. We are committed to bringing the best of Oregon State University to the people of all ages and industries. We do corporate training as well, so these programs are also brought to companies on site. And we are proud to partner with Neil Sahota to do just that. Thanks, Neil, for being here.
My pleasure.
I'm going to introduce Neil a little bit. He's going to go over today's agenda. He's going to go over the value add presentation on business analysis and business analytics. We're going to talk a little bit about the business analyst certificate today and the program benefits. And we're also going to open up for Q&A and give you some information. So this is Neil Sahota. He's a project executive with IBM Global Business Services. He's got over 13 years experience with business and IT. He's responsible for sales and execution of large and complex programs spanning across business and development, new product development, business and systems integration, and also process improvement. Sounds like you have a lot of lean in your background too, Neil. He works in, his experience has spanned multiple industries, including healthcare, life science, retail, travel, transportation, energy and utilities, automotive, telecommunications, media communications, and government. I have had the honor to work with Neil for the last decade, and I have watched him grow in his career and also educate thousands of students across this program. So thank you, Neil, so much for being an instructor here at Oregon State University. All right, Neil, so I wanted to have you talk a little bit about the value add.
It'd be my pleasure. I don't know if I control the slides or not, Melanie, but if not, I can just ask you to move to the next one.
I'll for you.
Okay. So hello, everybody. Glad you guys took time off for what might be your lunch break to join us. And I want to just share a little bit about business analytics, the business analyst role in particular, and the value add it actually brings to an organization. So if we go to the next slide. So if you ask most people, what does a business analyst do? Typically you'll hear them say, well, they're the guys that document the requirements, maybe help out with a little testing as well. Well, a business analyst really does way more than that. And if you look at this honeycomb diagram, I actually touched into a lot of different areas. So it's really more than just gathering and documenting requirements, but it's really looking for the business opportunities, understanding what the problem is, helping identify the right solutions, making sure that whatever we're pursuing, particularly for our project, actually aligns with the overall business goal. It's about, interacting with people and, working with different personality types. It's about keeping people informed, managing change, making sure that, despite what we may not understand, anybody off the street could understand what we're trying to do. So essentially using simple, clear, concise, common language. So the hats the business analyst has to wear is actually a lot, and it's really a lot to juggle. And that's why, I say that there's a science to the role, but there's a bit of an art to it. So if we go to the next. Right? The really question becomes is, why do we need a business analyst? And if you've ever worked on a project or an initiative within your own company or organization, You've probably seen things where somebody comes down and says, hey, I want to do this, right? I've got this project like this. So maybe your sponsor, your customer's like, I want to go to Mars. All right, so we'll find a project manager to make it happen. Project manager's going to storm around saying, all right, well, we're going to Mars, we need a plan on how to do it. Right? You're going to bring in your subject matter experts. They're going to be like, okay, well, we're going to use space shuttle to get to Mars. You get your developers or architects or whoever is doing the build work here, and they're going to be like, well, I need some requirements. How many times have you worked on in a project and you weren't quite clear what you're trying to do, right? You might know what the scope of the project is, but you're not sure how you're contributing to the overall value of the company, right? Like, what are you really trying to do at the end of the day? It's actually a very common challenge that I've seen, even in Fortune 10 companies, where people are working on things because they're told to. Well, a good business analyst is going to ask the question, why are we going to Mars, right? Why does the sponsor, the owner, whoever it is, wants to do this in the first place? What are we trying to accomplish from them goal-wise, objective-wise? And that's really why we need a business analyst, because they'll help us define what's the problem at hand, help us understand then what's the right solution, how are we, quote unquote, directionally correct with what we want to do with our project initiative, help us really figure out what's kind of the right solution, and then take us all the way through the project. So it's not just gathering the requirements and handing it off to people, it's making sure that people understand and that we're tracing the requirements and testing them as well. So the role is more than just requirements documenter. It's really somebody that understands and knows that we're fulfilling some business objective. So we go to the next slide. So it sounds like a lot of hats, and it is. You might be asking yourself, well, as a business analyst, what are the expectations, right? I'm working with a team. What do they expect from me? Well, first and foremost, they expect you to actually gather and analyze information, right? You are there to help define what the requirements are. Second, though, is you got to work with a lot of different personalities. If you ever worked on a project, you've probably seen that, there's different types of stakeholders. Some are for the project, some are against the project. It might be that, the project's automating them out of a job, so they're not real pleased with it. So how are you going to manage those different personalities to actually get the information you need and then actually formulate the right requirements? Third, you have to be able to write effectively. With all honesty, we as human beings are not the best communicators, and writing, it can be a challenging thing, right? Especially that when you know something very well, and as a business analyst, you're neck deep in all this stuff, you understand it very well, so what you write might make perfect sense, but it may not make some sense to somebody else. And you can't afford ambiguity when it comes to information and requirements documentation, because that leads to assumptions. Assumptions can lead to, errors and mistakes, which leads to rework and leads to extra costs and delays. Which takes us to our fourth puzzle piece, is you also got to make sure that you keep your team updated on what's going on. So communication, very critical thing. If you guys are familiar with PMI, they say, 90% of project management is communication. Very true in the business analyst world as well. Next is really raising risks and issues effectively, right? Anything we do is always fraught with risk. Risk is not necessarily a bad thing. It can be a good thing. The risk is really uncertainty, and you want to make sure that you're calling those things out. We're never going to have perfect requirements. There's always going to be gaps. We're always going to have to make assumptions. So it's a business analyst's job to make sure those things get documented and people are made aware of. And then last but not least, business analyst does do real work, right? Unlike project managers where they tend to delegate a lot of the work out, and that's their job, business analysts actually produce artifacts. They produce requirements documentations. They might help produce test plans, test scripts. They might document assumptions. They might document business benefits. So there's a lot of hard deliverables involved. If you go to the next slide. You might be asking, okay, this stuff makes sense. It seems very common sense. Why is there so much emphasis on this? Well, poor requirements can lead to a lot of issues, right? I won't go through all these items here, but this kind of showcases some of the challenges that are going on today, right? If the Standards Group actually publishes a report every year called the Chaos Report, and consistently for the last 16 years, one of the top 3 reasons why projects fail are poor requirements. Often number 1 is scope creep, which is part of the requirements management process. So when that stuff happens, we have gaps, we miss things, we spend time going back and fixing them. And they've shown that, especially in software projects, 40% of the cost right there is just going back and fixing errors, the things that they could have caught during like the requirements gathering process. So a lot of money, it's a lot of time, right? It's because what the work of business analyst really does is the beginning of like a project or initiative. It's very key to get it done right the first time. Otherwise, it causes a major ripple effect downstream. And when you catch something further down the chain, it winds up costing more and taking more time to fix. So we go to the next slide. So that might beg the question then, okay, if a business analyst is really focused on fulfilling business goals, business benefits, and getting these requirements, what is a requirement? You know, and the official definition is it's a necessary attribute, capability, characteristic, or quality of a solution in order for it to have value and utility to a user. Well, it's a very, very meaty mouthful, but basically what do we need, right? Based on our business need, what is that we need, and what are those features and functions associated with that need to actually build some sort of solution or product or service around it. So if I were to ask you guys for a moment to think and say, what are the requirements to build a new bike, right? You might say, okay, well, the bike shall have a seat. It'll have a front wheel. It'll have a rear wheel. It'll have a chain, right? That's a good start, but if we go to the next slide, right, that's not really sufficient and clear enough for people to understand, right? What do you even mean by seat? Is that like a box seat? Is it a triangle seat? Should it have padding, not have padding? And this is why when it comes to requirements, we have a life cycle. It's the business analyst's job to make sure that we're adhering to the life cycle. And the first step is to gather the requirement. So if we know we're building a bike and we need a seat, then we'll obviously capture that and document it, right? But then we got to classify that requirement. Well, is the seat a feature? Is it a function? Is it something else? Well, the seat really has multiple pieces to it, right? One might be the shape, which is kind of a feature of it. Does it need padding, which is a function, right? Should it be a certain size? Well, that might be kind of a system requirement for the seat. So we already can see we can start decomposing this requirement to more granularity that will create more value. And so once we do that and say, you know what, this is actually a mountain bike. So I need a bike with a seat raised up higher than normal, has extra padding, this type of dimension and shape, and so forth, then we can verify those requirements, right? Analyze the requirement, make sure we've got all the I's dotted, T's crossed, that we got everything like that, and then we manage the requirements. So we want to make sure that when the bike is actually being designed and constructed, that bike seat is matching those requirements. So when it comes to testing time, we want to be able to test and show that every requirement we have listed was met. So it's very, very arduous process. Unfortunately, a lot of organizations that I've seen, especially unfortunately large clients, think that once you have something documented down as a requirement, that's kind of the end of the story. It's not just a simple statement. There's actually a lot of thought, analysis, and work that goes into it. So if we go to the next slide. So how do we really do this then? How do we figure out what are these requirements? How do we get to this level of granularity? It's through a process we call elicitation. So we talk with customers, we talk with stakeholders, we talk with users, we talk with parties that can give us the right information. We may also talk with sponsors, executives to also understand what are the business goals, right? Are we creating this new bike to enter a new market, try to increase market share, try to increase revenue, try to appeal to a new niche? and make sure that we're, again, aligned with all those things. And there's a variety of ways we can do to try and draw this out. And I'll talk a little bit more about tools and techniques in a little bit. But we just can't sit there and ask people like, well, hey, what are your requirements or what should you do? Because often they don't have a good idea up front. So we kind of have to help coach them in the process. So it's really the business analyst's job to help people think. Think about the product, think about the solution, to actually flush out those details. So if we can go to the next slide. So there are several different types of requirements. We have what's called general or business requirements. These are usually the products or feature sets that we see from our product or solution. We might have business rules. So there might be things we have to adhere to in terms of, where we want to market, where we can sell through. Maybe we can only sell directly to bike stores. Maybe we only sell online. Maybe we have a relationship with Amazon. We got to factor those things in. We also got to think about quality, right? Most people aren't going to sit there and think about, okay, what's a reasonable bike seat, for example. Intuitively, they may know, but you have to find a way to flesh that out. So what are those quality attributes? We also have functional requirements. So what's the purpose of having something, right? Why do we need a seat? Why does the seat need to be raised a certain level? So if we are building a mountain bike, it needs to have some sort of recoil to protect the rider. We also have non-functional requirements. These usually will not come from like a customer or a user, but may come from actually like designers, engineers, architects, whoever it might be, that say things of like performance or security. We also have use cases, which is a little different form of requirement. We're actually trying to take like a user persona. We might take a typical average mountain biker and go through a scenario to help flush out some additional requirements. We might have data definition. So if this was particularly a software project, we might be looking at what kind of data sets do we need to build our software. And again, external interface. So if we have connections, if we have, we're going to build this new mountain bike, but only sell it online, what are those channels to do that? So we can go to the next slide. So I won't bore you with this entire giant table over here, but what constitutes good requirements? And that's a question I get asked a lot, right? How do I know I've written a good requirement? Well, these are the criteria you want to go for. And there are a lot of them, so you can see why it's not easy to write well-written requirements. Like one thing, it should be what we call atomic, in that it should not be able to be broken down to smaller requirements, which means you have to get pretty granular at the level of the requirement you're looking for. So again, you take our bike and say, well, the bike has to have a front wheel. Could we break that down even further, right? So we say, well, a bike has to have a front wheel with a radius of 8 inches. You could, right? So those are the things you have to look for. You have to look for, obviously, for completeness, consistency. But one of the key things I want to point out here is positive, right? When we think about things, we often think about what we don't need, but we have to think about what is really needed. So if we were talking about our bike seat again, we don't want to say, well, the bike seat, it doesn't need to be blue, and it doesn't need to be a rectangle, and it doesn't need to be made out of metal. That's great, but that doesn't help me, right? The universe of things that it can't be is a lot larger than what it should be. So we want to try and focus people on telling us what it should be, what we really need. All right, so we can go to the next slide. So how does a business analyst actually gather document requirements? There are a variety of tools available to them. So they can use something called business concept diagramming. So you can actually like whiteboard out the components, take a look at what are the key pieces, and start fleshing out at a piecemeal way what we want to try and do. You can also use what's called a business node connection diagram. So if we have something that might intersect different parts of our business or might have multiple stakeholders involved, we can take a look at that. So if we were saying that our project is really to launch a whole new mountain bike, from soup to nuts, that we're not just, but we want a marketing campaign around it. We want to get our partners involved. Maybe, you know, we want to do some social media, blogging, advertising, find some influencers. We would take a look at all these different intersection points to flesh out the requirements for those pieces using a business node connection diagram. Similarly, we can use a business process hierarchy, where we can actually just take a look at the actual process and say, okay, how do we make the bike? And pick apart that to figure out, okay, based on that, what are some requirements we need to start thinking about? So if we know that here's the construction cycle and here are the, you know, 18 main components that every bike has, then we know then, okay, do all these 18 components, they fit into our mountain bike? Do we have more? And then start documenting requirements around them. So we can use process modeling, we can use context diagram. I won't bore you with all these guys, all these types of things. We can use system actor diagrams, which is essentially running through scenarios to help flesh out requirements. And of course, we have use cases. So we create personas that are representative users and actually walk through different scenarios. And when it comes to the scenarios, one key piece of advice I always tell everybody is you got to think unhappy. It's very easy to think about the happy path. What about the exception paths, right? To give you a simple example, ATM machine, you know, you pop your card in, you put your PIN, you do whatever you want. But what if someone puts their card in incorrectly? What if they put it in upside down? So you got to start thinking about those variant use cases. If you can go to the next slide.
All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about the Business Analyst Certificate, but before we do that, it looks like Carol has raised her hand to ask a question, Neil, and maybe it was regarding the last, let me unmute her, see if we can. Oops. There we go. Carol, do you have a question for Neil? Well, Carol, if you have a question, you can either ask it aloud now, you're unmuted, or you can chat the question directly in the chat box. I want to make sure that you get your questions answered. We are going to see, Lynn also has a question. What's the difference between a product manager and a business analyst? These are many things that I do as a project manager.
That's a great question. Some of it might just be the way your organization structures the roles. One of the things a product manager typically does that you don't see a business analyst do is the product manager will actually go out, solicit feedback from customers like already using the project. One, not just to get input and how happy they are with it, but to also identify future feature sets they might want to put in their product. As well as product managers tend to write white papers and some marketing copy to promote the product. That's not something you typically see a business analyst do. Usually they're more saying like, okay, there's some sort of problem opportunity at hand. We need to define what that is and then figure out what's the right solution. So some of the work a product manager actually might do by collecting that feedback from the customers would probably feed into future enhancements or maybe even a future product or a future project, that a business analyst might then integrate, identify, and work on.
Great, that's good. Lynn, I hope that helps. She wanted to add that she does do them all and has worked for large and small companies, HP and Logitech. So it sounds like with the business analyst, you're on the front end doing a lot of the requirements gathering, or if the product changes, you're helping to kind of evolve that product. Well, good. Well, thanks, Lynn. If you have any other questions for Neil, he'll be happy to answer. So let's talk a little bit about the Business Analyst Certificate program, Neil, that you helped develop here. I wanted to let everybody know that the program is launching this May 30th. We have two different formats. We have an online and a hybrid course option. So basically what that means is the online, they're 100% online, instructor-led. Neil's coaching you week by week on projects, discussion prompts. There's different activities going on throughout the course. The average course length is 6 weeks online. And then the hybrid is a little bit different. So there is an online, you come face-to-face for 2 days in Corvallis. So there's an online component that's taking you throughout about 2 weeks, and then you come online face-to-face and have a 2-day face-to-face instruction with Neil Sahota. So there's different formats, and you can pick, you can interchange the formats if you want to do 100% online and then maybe one of the classes hybrid. Those options are available. So there's 5 total courses in the series, and you can take all of them as a full certificate, or you can enroll. They're all open, so you can take them a la carte. The total cost of each course is about $487, so the total roll-up of the certificate is just under $2,500, including all the materials and everything. These are the list of the 5 total courses, and Neil, I kind of wanted to have you step through what's happening through each course. So we have the Introduction of Business Analysts and Needs Assessment, Requirements Planning, Eliciting the Requirements, Tracing the Requirements, and Requirements Project Capstone. Can you talk a little bit about the whole certificate life and basically what's happening in each course and what's covered at a high level?
Yeah, absolutely, be happy to. So the curriculum is actually based off PMI's PBA certification. So if that's something people are interested, this will, I think, satisfy your education requirements as well as help you prepare for the test. But so the first course is really an introduction. It's a little bit of wine tasting to give you an idea on some of the concepts involved in being a business analyst, as well as take you to the first step of what a business analyst should do in terms of best practice, which is actually conduct the needs assessment. So to understand, okay, we got something going on, it might be some new project, new initiative. Well, what's the problem we're trying to solve? How do we start figuring out then what's the right idea, right solution to start scoping out the work? The second course is requirements planning. So how do we start setting up to actually conduct requirements, to actually go out, gather, to actually do the elicitation, as well as prep for other things? Because again, one of the best practices is when it comes to requirements, you start doing that work, you should also start doing kind of the test planning as well, because you want to be able to have that requirements traceability. So how do you get that infrastructure set up? How do you start interviewing stakeholders, and so forth? Eliciting requirements is actually then how do you write a well-written requirement? How do you do that verification process and analysis process so that you know that what you have is actually correct, as complete? So all those, I think it's 14 or 15 criteria of a good requirement. How do you know you're actually meeting all those things? And how do you know you're avoiding gaps? So again, how do you know that you double check that I'm spoken to all the right people and capture the right information? Tracing requirements is then saying, okay, once we've got the requirements documented, how do we explain it to people so that they understand? And as they go through and actually build whatever the product or solution is, how are we tracking that all along the way? So how do I know the designers are applying the requirements correctly? How do I know the engineers, builders, whoever it might be, are constructing per the requirements? And then when it comes time to testing, how do I know that I'm testing to make sure that every requirement is met? And then the last course is really like a capstone project. So it really takes you and says, okay, you've learned all this stuff, soup to nuts. It's been a little bit piecemeal. We're going to run through this whole thing in a real world scenario to say, can we actually apply it? So I'm a very big proponent on like hands-on type of learning. And my goal for my students is I want them to be able to do it in any kind of situation. So I know that when you're listening to concepts, you're enacting, it seems to make sense. But then when you go out and try and do it on your own or on the job, there's always something that seems a little bit off, and it can become a little bit of a stumbling block. So throughout all the courses, there's some group work, but the last course actually is the capstone project, where you now have to try and apply everything you've learned end to end at one time to actually, for lack of a better word, simulate being a business analyst on a project.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Neil. So each course is roughly 5 to 7 weeks. We kind of an average of 6 weeks long. We're seeing that the certificate, the quickest could be about 6 months. The average course time spent, or average time spent in the course is about 3 to 8 hours, and that's dependent on what projects are going on week to week. But that's so we kind of shoot on a 5-hour a week commitment. to the course and your learning, but you're doing what you're applying in the course you should be able to apply next day if you are currently working as a business analyst. So we're really seeing, the objectives of the program is just to give a high value of the role that a business analyst does serve, understand how it relates to IT solutions and different projects, identify the business needs and the costs and the benefits of all these of the technical solutions, how to formulate specific business specifications and technical solutions, and how those can be developed and also implemented. And like that cartoon described, bridging the gap between business and IT, and you're really the communicator between the two, understanding all the tools and techniques and approaches, and also accessing business problems and opportunities. And that's really shown in the capstone course when you do a real life scenario of executing and analyzing solutions problems and giving some recommendations to how the business needs can be met. And I think the best is exposure to real world instructors and having this personal coach as a business analyst practitioner himself, but with years of experience to coach you along week to week. So Neil, also we did have a question that just came in about those, tools. Are there any top tools that you'd recommend for a business analyst? Are there free tools there?
Free tools. There's a lot of diagramming type of tools out there. Mm-hmm. I personally like FreeMind, which is a mind mapping tool. It's free to use, but I'd say that when it comes to the tools, you should take two things into account, figuring out what's the right tool to use. So one is, what's the best way to reach your audience, right? How do they learn or explain things effectively? For some people, it might be drawing. For some people, it might be talking. For some people, it might be walking through a scenario. The second is also think about what you're trying to do and the complexity to it. So much like a project manager, tries to chop up the work into small bites, how do you eat an elephant? A business analyst kind of has to do the same thing, right? If you try to tackle everything at once, you can overwhelm people. So you got to think a little more strategically. So rather than say, how do I build a whole bike, you might focus on the seat first. And then on that thing, you might actually say, well, here's some pictures of other mountain bikes. You might do a straw man proposal or something so that at least you get people trying to think about what you want to do.
Great, thank you. So who should be in this program? So we see, those that, and I'd love to toss this back to you, Neil, but requirements engineers, process analysts, software systems architects, product managers, product marketers, QA analysts, business planners, those resource specialists, and any professional that's working on improving projects. Do you have to have, obviously we have a lot of career changers that come to continuing education for our division for training. So is this course really for those who want to get started in the field as well as those who want to kind of better themselves while in the field, or both? Would you say, Neil?
It's really for both. So if people are trying to get into the space, definitely a great curriculum. If you're already in the space and you just want to hone your skills or learn some of the best practices, again, very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Do you find that many people become an accidental business analyst?
That's typically what happens, right? Somebody might show a little bit of skill, like they're very good at writing documents, or they happen to have some domain knowledge and they kind of get thrust into the role. So, we used to say that, there's more business analysts by accident rather than being born. It's very similar, unfortunately, to some other roles like project manager. And so you get people that, they're doing the job and they're probably doing an okay job, maybe a little better than okay, but no formal training or understanding. And so sometimes they don't realize that they could probably do their job more effectively and create more value.
Great. We do have a couple of new business analysts on the line. Is there any advice that you'd give them for getting their foot in the door?
That's question. So one, I'd say don't be afraid to take risks, right? One of the things about being a business analyst, especially kind of first out the door when it comes to new project initiative, is don't be scared to speak up a bit, right? Risk is not necessarily a bad thing, right? It's just an uncertain event. So, you're going to hear a lot of people talking about things. People have a lot of their ideas. You see people starting to, as we say, solution before they understand the problem. You should really willing to speak up on that and take a little bit of risk and say, hey, before we start designing our solution, let's make sure we understand the problem. And that's a space that, or that's an area I've seen you as analysts struggle with, because they are new to the role and they think, well, whatever people are saying is the right solution, must be the right solution because they know better. But more often than not, they really haven't thought about the problem first. And so you wind up, creating something and then you try and wedge it somewhere as a fit, and that may not happen. You'll find that to be a really good business analyst, you help people understand what the problem is first before they try and design anything.
Great. We got another question about roles. So where does the BA leave off and the product owner pick up?
So that's a great question. If you were to kind of, I guess, what's the word I'm going to segregate is the right word here. Business analysts tend to work on like projects for initiatives. The things that they tend to work on are temporary, maybe not necessarily unique, but definitely temporary. Product managers tend to work on the same product over and over again. They're more the operational side, whereas a business analyst is more the project side. So the product manager is going to be concerned about things like the customer feedback and what's happening in the market, how are sales, white papers, promotion, trying to capture, future needs, features, functions from their existing customers or potential customers. Business analyst doesn't really do any of that work. That's more operational, right? The product manager might come back and say, well, we've done these focus groups, we've done these surveys, and, we hear that our customers like the product, but they don't love it. They feel like there's these two gaps, right? And then that might turn into a project to improve the product, and that's when you bring a business analyst in to say, okay, let's first understand what are these two gaps, right? What are the problems? We're trying to capture more market share, we're trying to get more revenue, whatever it might be, and then work with the project team to actually identify the right solution and help them build it out.
Excellent. That's an excellent question. Thank you, Neil. So Kira has a question here. Kira, I'm going to unmute you so you can ask Neil your question. One second. So difficult here. There we go. All right, Kira, go ahead and ask your question. Kira, do you have a direct question you want to ask Neil? You're unmuted. Okay, go ahead. Oops, she keeps muting herself. Kira, go ahead and ask your question.
I was just saying that my question got answered, actually, so thank you.
Oh, excellent. All right, well, thank you so much for being here. All right, so Neil, let's talk a little bit about, presentation mode went off. Sorry about that. All right, so we talked a little bit about all your value add. We're down at the very end about certificates and who are they for and how to get started. So our courses begin in May. We can register here. We're going to send you this session was recorded, and it's going to be available in the next 24 hours. We'll send you out the link as well as the presentation slides. We want to also honor your time and thank you for being here by giving you 20% off your first course. and the certificate if you register for the full bundle. So you can register by clicking on the hyperlink there above. We also want to be able to ask or have you ask and have us answer any of your questions as you go forward through the registration process. So here's all of our contact information. And if you want to reach out to Neil directly, he's welcomed you to connect with him on his personal email, as well as reaching out to Paula or myself about the programs and the program questions. So we want to thank Neil so much for your time. And I don't see, yes, the slides will be sent out. That was one question that just came through. The slides will be sent out to all attendees as well as the recording. So feel free to share the recording with anybody that you think would also have an interest in the program. The coupon code will also be sent out in your email thanking you for your attendance. So thanks, Neil, again for your time, and thank you for sharing your knowledge of the business analytics. And we're excited to host this program and kick it off here this May. Do you have any final thoughts to close?
It was my pleasure, and I appreciate all of you guys, again, carving out a little time from your lunch break to attend. I hope you found this useful, and I hope to see you in a future class. Excellent. Thank you so much, Neil. Have a great day, everyone. Go Beavs.